Hello viewers, and welcome to yet another episode of Economic Sutra. In this episode, we are going to look into a very interesting topic, which is India's presidency of the G20, which is just about to start in the next few days. Now, what is this all about? Now, to give you some sense of it, we need to step back a bit and think about what is this institution at all. The G20 is a grouping of 19 of the most important countries in the world, plus the European Union. And this grouping came about because it was felt that there was a need for a body that was somewhat smaller and more coherent than the United Nations that would come together more actively and deal with the issues of the day. Now, of course, after the Second World War, a big body called the United Nations had been built to coordinate global issues, and while it did and continues to play an important role, it was felt by the 70s that a smaller body was needed that would be able to deal with issues on a more real-time basis. This eventually led to the growth of a body called the G7, which still exists incidentally, of the world's largest economies. But by the 90s, it became quite apparent that the G20 simply wasn't representative enough. So at the very end of the 90s, a new grouping began to emerge, initially with finance ministers and central bank governors, which eventually evolved into the G20. The G20 came together in 2008 in the midst of the global financial crisis, which was wrecking the world economy at that time. And since then, this has become really the grouping that provides leadership on a variety of global issues. For example, during the COVID crisis, as you will remember, both the UN and the WHO were moving a lot slower than they should have at that point in time. So it was really the G20 with its global action plan that came up and provided the coordination necessary for the world to keep functioning during those very difficult times. Now, how does this G20 grouping work? It doesn't have a permanent secretariat. Instead, what happens is that every year a member country takes up its presidency. So this year in 2022, the presidency is with Indonesia, and it will be passed on to India in the next few weeks. And so during the course of 2023, India will be the G20 presidency. So this is a real opportunity for India to show global leadership. And as you can imagine, a big effort has been put into this. Now the G20 as it functions using two tracks. One is the finance track, which is run by the Ministry of Finance. This really looks into various economic, finance type issues. And on all other topics, the leadership is provided by what is called the Sherpa track. So to talk to you about this and more, we have India's Sherpa to the G20, Mr. Amitabh Kant. Welcome to the show. Let me start with the most obvious question, which is, what is the significance of India taking the presidency on in this period where, of course, we've just come out of the pandemic. This will be hopefully the first full year after the pandemic where we will, where somebody will be a presidency. Both the Saudi and the Italian presidencies of 2020 and 21 were, of course, impacted by the pandemic, and even much of the Indonesian presidency was impacted by pandemic. So we will be hopefully the first year which will be fully on. We also take on the presidency at a time when there is a war on in Eastern Europe. There are issues with energy. So give us a sense of why this is an important thing, both for G20 and for, of course, India.
Thank you, Sanjeev, for having me on this show. I'm truly delighted to interact with you. G20 is firstly important because it accounts for about 85% of the global GDP. It also accounts for about 78% of the global trade and 2/3 of the complete population of the world. But I think more important than that is that it's the only body which comprises of both the developed world, that is the G7, and of emerging markets. So United Nations is too large a body, it's too unwieldy a body. The G7 is too elitist a body, and G20, because it comprises both developed and developing world, is the right body to take all the major global decisions in the world today. So the post-2008 financial crisis, G20 rose to the situation. On the issue of the debt, much later, the DSSI, that the Debt Servicing Sustainability Initiative, came from G20, and many other initiatives have come from G20. Now, G20 in India will be held at a point of time when by the time India takes over the growth, there will be a looming crisis of global slowdown of growth. In many parts of the world, there would be recession. There's a breakdown of global supply chains. We've seen the post-COVID pandemic impact across populations in the world. We've seen action on climate scenario, on a vast range of issues, and you've also had a situation where geopolitics is at its worst. Countries are not speaking to each other, and therefore this is a major crisis in the world. There are a huge range of issues which are confronting the world today. Now, every crisis is also an opportunity, and to my mind, India gets this opportunity to be action-oriented, to be ambitious.
Absolutely.
And as the Prime Minister has rightly said, that India must set the agenda. This is what is important. That so far, we have been giving our comments to agendas being set by the developed world. This is for the first time that India gets the opportunity of setting the agenda for the world and getting other countries to react to that and being in a leadership position and to be able to really build consensus around many such issues. And therefore, this is a rare opportunity for India. The Prime Minister wants the G20 to be held in all parts of the country, all states and all union territories, so that citizens of India are involved in this great, huge process of G20. Also, that this is an opportunity so that the Sherpa track, which has 13 working groups, finance track, which has 8 working tracks, and there are many, many engagement groups. There are about 11 engagement groups. And during our presidency, we'll have 2 separate working groups, one working group relating to the disaster risk resilience, and an engagement group, which is the startup group, which is a new initiative by India. And therefore, converging and integrating the Sherpa track, the finance track, the engagement groups, all to work towards the common objectives and the common priorities being set out by India for bringing growth, dynamism, lifting people above poverty line, and ensuring that there is climate action.
So, as you know, every G20 presidency has a theme. So, for example, the Italians in 2021 had people, planet, prosperity. The Indonesians have recover together, recover stronger. We have chosen our theme to be Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, which is the world as a family. Can you give us a sense of what is the significance of using this theme, and particularly in what concrete way will this inform the way we deal with the agenda?
So Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam really means one earth, one family, one future. It draws its inspiration from our ancient civilization, that we are all of us, all human beings. This whole earth is part of one cosmic web, and that there is unity in diversity. There's unity in diversity as far as individuals are concerned. There's unity in diversity as far as countries are concerned. There is unity in diversity as far as philosophical thoughts are concerned. There is unity in diversity in different geographic models are concerned. But eventually we are all one human being, and therefore we derive this basic principle that once we realize the essence of this, which is from our ancient civilization, that Mother Earth is really the foundation of all its children, that we will be able to draw peace, tranquility, a common agenda for growth, and a common agenda for the progress of the vast segments of people who have been impacted due to COVID. 125 million people have gone below poverty line. 75 million people have lost their jobs. The world is facing a severe crisis of climate change. There are huge challenges of geopolitics. You have a scenario where we need people to work together, to interact together, and there cannot be a better theme than the ancient civilizational theme of India, that is Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, that is we are one family at the end of it all. So it is a philosophical theme, but behind this philosophy, there are many issues and there are many challenges. So the challenge for India will be really at this point of time to bring inclusive, resilient, and sustainable growth at the heart of our G20 presidency. There will be this challenge also of putting out, accelerating the pace of SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, because we're midway through the 2030 agenda. And since COVID has impacted learning outcomes, health outcomes, nutrition, we need to accelerate the pace of it. And thirdly, that whatever growth needs to take place, as India has demonstrated, should be taking place with sustainability. The other key aspect is that the Prime Minister wants a lot of India narrative to come out. And India has created a unique model of digital transformation based on digital public goods. We've created digital identity, we have created data empowerment, and we have created fast payments. And we created many unique models of public goods like CoWIN, like FASTag, like DigiLocker. All these are public goods. And therefore, what India has demonstrated is this unique model. Normally, technological innovations come from the developed part of the world. This is for the first time that a developing and an emerging market like India has said that this is a model which ensures both privacy and innovation. And you can create public tracks on which private sector can innovate. So India's
So an important theme of this is going to be using the digital commons to kind of weld together the world as a family. Would that be an important thing?
Well, the important point which India will make is that if you want to grow, if you want to prosper, if you want to lift people above poverty line, then you need a model like what India has created, the digital public infrastructure model, because there is a recent study by the Bank of International Settlement which demonstrates that what India has achieved in the last 7 or 8 years is more than what it would have normally achieved in 50 years. And therefore, by building digital identity, it has been able to ensure that it is able to put money into the bank accounts of people, which between 2014 and 2018, 55% of the bank accounts across the world were created in India. So everyone has a bank account. He's able to access that through his mobile, and there are no leakages. 600 schemes of the government, we put money straight into the bank accounts, and this has been huge transformation. So what we've created is a unique model for the world where private and public compete. India is the only country in the world where Google Pay competes with PhonePe, where WhatsApp competes with Paytm, and in the marketplace. So we have pushed for privacy of data, we have pushed for digital identities, we have pushed for fast payments. The challenge in the world is that there are 4 billion people who do not have a digital identity. The challenge in the world is that there are close to 2 billion people who do not have a bank account. The challenge is that fast payments exist in only 55 of the 186 countries of the world. And therefore, India needs to tell the world that we are going to work with them to accelerate the pace of growth through digital transformation. That will be the key.
So let me change the topic a little bit to focus on the structure of the G20. What is the difference between the finance track and the Sherpa track? I know many viewers will be wondering the use of the term Sherpa. And how do all these working groups you mentioned, how do they work? How is consensus reached? And As you know, I functioned on behalf of India as the co-chair of the Framework Working Group for 5 years. And it was an amazing experience in terms of building consensus. So give us some sense of how the actual functioning of G20 happens.
Yes. So let me go back in history a little bit and tell you that actually this is an innovation from G7.
Okay.
And the G7 realized that the growth of emerging markets is expanding and growing much faster than the developed world. And therefore, many of the crises, if you look at it, the Russian financial crisis, the Mexican peso crisis, the Southeast Asian crisis, all these crises led to the G7 expanding the base to G20. And this was restricted originally to the finance minister and the central bank governors. In 2008, President Bush in the United States of America took the initiative to expand it to the leaders' level. They realized that the challenges before the world in terms of growth, in terms of SDGs, in terms of climate, are too severe, too acute. The challenges are too big to be just left not to be handled by leaders. And therefore, they started inviting the G20 leaders. A G20 working group with leaders was constituted, where the then Prime Minister participated. And then this grew. Now, the challenge was that G20 faced, many crises, but every time it has taken a bold, decisive action. The great thing is that there are many emerging markets. This is for the first time that you've had an emerging market like Indonesia leading it.
And passing the baton on to us.
And we pass on the baton to Brazil, and Brazil in turn passes on the baton to South Africa. So there are 4 emerging markets.
Who will be running the agenda for 4 straight years.
So emerging markets have a very big role to play. The role of the Sherpa is critical. It's critical because he's like the envoy of the leader. So there are Sherpas from all these 20 countries. They are the envoys of the leader. They have to find a solution and arrive at the final communique working in partnership with other countries. The Sherpa basically means that Sherpa takes the leader up to the summit, and therefore he has to take all the weight, all the conflict, all the
challenges. Is that where the term comes from?
That's it. All the challenges, all these issues, and find solutions so that all the leaders are then able to sit and find solutions to the challenges of the world. He's basically an envoy of the leader.
Got it. Now, of course, we discussed about how the government is going to be running, and what the agenda of the governments will be. But of course, the G20 has now grown to be much more than just the government. There is a wider ecosystem of events that happen as well. So there is, for example, the B20, which involves the business. There's all kinds of other non-government organizations meeting on the sidelines and so on. So can you give us a flavor of the wider ecosystem of events and consultations and interactions that will happen?
So Sanjeev, during the course of our presidency, there will be 200 meetings of the working groups. That is between the finance track and the Sherpa track. In addition to this, there are engagement groups. There are 11 engagement groups. And these engagement groups have their own meeting. There are the Business 20, there's the Youth 20, there's the Community 20, all of them. Now, Business 20 itself will be having close to about 100 odd meetings. The Think 20 will have about 70 odd meetings across the country. So actually the country will see close to over 500 international meetings during this period. The challenge for India is to ensure that every visitor who comes to India during this period goes back totally spiritually invigorated, mentally rejuvenated, and physically elevated and goes back as an Indian. So we are trying to enmesh not merely the official business of doing meetings, but to create a huge Indian experience around culture, around cuisine, around a vast range of activities, so that the element of close experiential India is built into this. And every single visitor will go back as an Indian from here.
So over the next 1 year, I believe their meetings are going to be held in 55 different locations across the country. No trivial number. Can you give a flavor of what are these locations? How were they chosen? What should we expect in these places?
So we worked in partnership with the state governments because after all, it's the state governments play a very critical role. The Prime Minister spoke to all the chief ministers and said that they should all actively participate. They should do their own competitions, and therefore we've tried to pick up the best talent for cultural shows. All the states are actively involved. We picked up key areas. Every state there will be a meeting. Every union territory there will be a meeting. There are key areas, several places where there is major.
So give us some of the names where.
So say for instance Kumaragam in Kerala, in the backwaters, Udaipur, Varanasi, Mumbai. Look at Nagaland, Manipur, Andaman, Lakshadweep.
So that's quite something because you know
every
places
place.
like Manipur, for example, would not normally be hosting anything. So this is going to be quite.
So this is a pan-India movement. This is really about making every citizen of India aware of the significance and importance of what India is doing for G20 and how India has taken leadership position in the world, and that this is the first time that India is setting the agenda for the world.
So just so that viewers know, this is actually quite an experiment because historically G20 tends to be in just 2-3 locations and with repeated events. So for example, now in Indonesia, most of the events are in Bali, some are in Yogyakarta or in Jakarta, but there are 3-4 real locations where it happens, not much. This idea of spreading across the country in dozens of locations, 55 I believe, that in itself is quite a challenging thing to do. So in that sense, we'll see how it works out, but I would say it is a very ambitious thing to want to do in the first place.
So the Prime Minister was very clear that this is the G20 is being hosted by India for the first time. It has large number of meetings. We should not keep them urban-centric. We should not restrict it to a few cities, which is always done, Delhi, Mumbai, but to take them out, create the feel and experience of India for every guest who's coming. So there is a great experience in this. For instance, the Sherpa meeting is being held in Udaipur, the foreign ministers meeting is being held in Varanasi. There are many areas in Andaman, Lakshadweep, all these will get opened up.
Fantastic.
But the important thing, Sanjeev, is that when you do this, then you are really gearing up your infrastructure for that. So you ensure that local administration cleans up the city, it builds the infrastructure, it creates a
Plus
great
there is a
experience.
sense of national participation.
And they participate. It's not seen as something divorced from the citizens. So the citizens become active participants in the G20 movement of the world.
So now let me take you to where this all culminates, which is of course in the leaders meeting, which will, I believe, happened in September. So give us a sense of what happens. All the top leaders of the world come to India. Incidentally, viewers, of course the G20 leaders will come, but typically there are also guests as well, and we will be bringing in some of our neighboring countries into this. So give us a sense of who are all these people who will come, where will this big event happen, what are the arrangements that we are making to get ready for this?
So in addition to the G20, there are several invitees like Spain and Netherlands and so on. And India, because it is hosting the summit, is inviting 9 other countries. Several of them are friends, such as Egypt and Bangladesh and Nigeria and many other. The reason is to bring in a larger diversity and involve them in this decision-making process. In addition to that, there are international organizations like IMF, World Bank, ADB, our own solar agency, and the CDRI, that is for disaster risk. And all of them will participate actively. And therefore, the top leadership of the world, all the key leaders of the world from across the world, and all the key decision makers from across the world will be in India. And this is the first time that you'll have about 43 leaders from across the world.
43
leaders.
So it's not 20.
It's 43.
It's 43
leaders from across the world, in addition to heads of international organizations. India has never seen this kind
And
of
this is happening in Delhi?
This will happen in Delhi towards the end in September. The dates are being worked out, but broadly around 9th, 10th and 11th of 9th and 10th, between 9th and 11th, around that period, we will work out, and this will be a unique gathering for India.
And where will the event actually be held? Has that been decided?
So we are looking at different options, but a new venue has been created in Pragati Maidan. So I think that will be
So Pragati Maidan will be an important part.
Ideal venue for this. So a lot of work is going on there right now, and this will be a unique experience which will be created.
So now to our very last question. Say a year from now, what do you think should have happened through the course of the year, which will give us satisfaction that yes, this was a year where India did give leadership, and hopefully we had a lasting legacy? What would be our sort of our goal and target that we would try to achieve through this entire process?
So Sanjeev, the critical thing is that I think it's important that the presidency of India should have made the world realize that we are all once citizens of the world, that we are able to spread this feeling of one family, one earth, and all of us, when we work together, we really build the future. If you do not do this, you will create huge challenges on fuel, food, fertilizer. All these challenges will come in. We will create artificial problems for ourselves, whereas we need to work together. So that in basic essence of this. But behind that, I think the key challenge for India would be really to push for accelerated growth, which is inclusive, resilient, sustainable, which benefits the citizens. Everything India will do will be for the citizens of the world. Everything that India does, as the Prime Minister has decided, that will be for the global South, for the developing country. We'll become the voice of the developing countries. Whatever we do will be for the sustainable growth and to accelerate the pace of sustainability and climate action. Whatever we do will be for the digital transformation of the world, and whatever we do will be for women-led development, who comprise 50% of the population of the world, as the Prime Minister has rightly said. So all of us, on all these issues, we'll work with the vision of the Prime Minister, who will lay down the priorities of the country.
So thank you, Mr. Kant. That was a very interesting summary of what we hope to see over the next 1 year. Thank you once again for being on the show. And viewers...
Thanks, my pleasure.
And viewers, this brings us to the end of one more episode of Economic Sutra. I hope you came away feeling more educated about India's presidency and of G20 in 2023. I'm sure many of you will get involved in multiple ways, or will witness some of the events that will go around it. With that, let me say goodbye for now. See you at the next episode of Economic Sutra on Sansad TV.